Michigan loses at Washington in a national championship game rematch, 24-17. And again, let's credit where credit is due here. Washington played a great game. Jedd Fisch is a very good football coach, and he's in his first year. He's got a lot of transfers. He's had to rebuild that roster after all of those veteran players left that under Kalen DeBoer went to a national championship game. So this was going to be a little bit of a slow process. And you're starting to see, though, why Jedd Fisch is such a good coach. Will Rogers is a good quarterback, by the way. I like what Washington does. That environment is an elite environment. There are elite environments, by the way, 2 of them in the Northwest. It is going to be, and Big Ten teams are going to learn this. It is not easy to go to Washington and Husky Stadium and win. It's not easy to go to Autzen Stadium in Oregon and win. It's just not. In fact, when you look at Washington, their last loss in Husky Stadium was 2021. That's pre-Kalen DeBoer. So, that's not a place that you just roll into. Ask Dan Lanning and Bo Nix and the Oregon Ducks. They went in there and got beat last year. And now Michigan rolls in there and they get beat this year. So Michigan drops their first Big Ten game since 2021. And I guess if you're Michigan, there's some solace in the fact that, did they find their quarterback? Did they find somewhat of their identity even in a loss now with Jack Tuttle at quarterback? It's pretty clear early in that game, they fall down 14-0, and Alex Orji is the quarterback, and it's like, this ain't working. And Sharon Moore makes the change, and he goes to Jack Tuttle. And Tuttle goes in there, and in his first 3 series, you're like, well, geez, did they just become a playoff team? That's kind of, it's like the Michigan of last year. And all of a sudden, you get a completion over the middle, and you get a wide receiver catching a ball, and you're like, oh, man, I haven't seen Omarion Walker show up yet, and I've thought he was going to show up, but it kind of fell apart down the stretch. So no, it's not a team that's going to probably go to the playoff, but now all of a sudden they've got a higher ceiling with Jack Tuttle. I believe that they expected Jack Tuttle to be available at the start of the year. This is the only way that I can reconcile what's been going on through the first month of the season at Michigan. The fact that they've looked so lost in trying to find their way offensively. It's like, hold on. Something happened in the offseason, and I think it's that they expected Tuttle to be ready, which is why they leaned into this style of system, which is why Davis Warren goes out there as a starting quarterback. Then they clearly have to move because of turnovers, and they go to Alex Orji because Tuttle is not ready, and Orji is just not ready to be a quarterback at this level. He does not throw it well enough. It's painfully obvious. He's a great athlete and a tremendous human being. I loved sitting with Alex Orji. He's got such a great perspective, but it wasn't working at quarterback. So now Jack Tuttle goes in there and you're like, okay, well, this looks like it's going to work. And then the fourth quarter starts. And Michigan reverts to a version of Michigan that, quite frankly, I haven't seen for the last 3 years. And it was a team that was undisciplined. They were not fundamentally sound. The structures and schematics were bad, and the decision-making was bad. It was all bad in the fourth quarter. They've given up now. And by the way, this is not the only game that this has happened. In the fourth quarter this year, they've allowed 63 points in 6 games. That's 6th most in college football. Something is going wrong in the fourth quarter. I immediately thought to myself, like, well, maybe it's a depth issue on defense because they don't have the depth on defense that they did a year ago. And that's true. And that would make sense, although they're not facing a ton more snaps. So I'm like, well, hold on. Like, maybe that's not it. Like, what else is it? Because this is a team last year that only gave up 47 points in the fourth quarter in all 15 games. What's going on? And then I'm thinking to myself, hold on. It's right on the film. When you walk through that film, you see a team that, quite frankly, plays 3 quarters instead of 4 because of the offensive system that was going on early. They spot them a 14-point lead, and then they come back and they take the lead. It's 17-14. And I've told you before, this Michigan team does not have a margin for error, so they've got to play sound. Everything. They've got to do things right. And when I say things, I mean kind of like everything right. You've got to play with great technique. You've got to play with great game management, decision-making, fundamentals, all of it. And all of that fell apart in the fourth quarter. When you walk through the film, and you watch that, here's what you see. You see a team that structurally on some of these defensive blitzes is not sound. I've been saying this, and it's imminently true again. Let me give you an example. Okay, so Washington lined up in a 3-by-1 structure with the 3 wide receivers in a bunch to the short side of the field. Okay, unless you're driving, just close your eyes and picture that. Kind of a bunch set of wide receivers, short side of the field. It was to the right side of the offense. A single receiver to the wide side of the field, okay? And 1 running back. So that's their set, okay? I would have called it like triple right. Okay, whatever. Who cares what I would call it? The defense lines up. And before the snap of the football, I paused the film and I'm like, well, that's wrong. So they have a single high safety. They have 2 corners. And then they have 3 linebackers. And one of the linebackers is walked out towards the single receiver, towards the wide side of the field. So there's 2 linebackers, I would say, in the box, 4 down linemen. And 1 linebacker walked out to that single receiver towards the wide side of the field. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, well, this isn't very good. Because now all they have is 1 corner and kind of a linebacker over the 3 receiver structure. And then they blitz 6 guys. So the 2 linebackers that were lined up inside and the 4 down linemen all blitz. And I'm like, wait a second. And there is a support player walked out to the field, a nickel or a linebacker, whatever you want to call them, with no one to defend. And there's only 2 players that are possible left to defend the 3 receiver side. And they just have a nice completion there because they can't get to the quarterback in time. And he just throws it over there because no one's defending him. And I'm like, 1, you can't play zone if you're going to blitz 6 guys. You better be in man-to-man defense. And you have 2 players over 3. It blew my mind. Maybe it's just a missed assignment, but that's not a structure that you can win with. It causes a first down and new set of downs. And then right after that, guess what happens? A bad leverage play and you miss a tackle. And then all of a sudden you give up points on that drive. Then the offense goes out there. Jack Tuttle doesn't make the right read. He's got a go route open. He decides to run the football and he fumbles and he gives up what? A short field. So here's things that didn't happen last year. They didn't give up short fields because they didn't turn the football over. If you turn the football over and you lose the field position battle as a Michigan team, you will lose the game. And they did. They gave up 2 short fields in the 4th quarter and gave up 10 points because of it. And they walked into that 4th quarter with a 17-14 lead. You can't win like that. So after one of the turnovers, they lose the edge on defense and run a bad route on the interception. Colston Loveland is drifting down the field. And I'm like, none of this is right. None of this is right. Bad structures, bad fundamentals, bad decisions, all of it bad. That's why they got beat in the 4th quarter. They don't have a good enough team to do that. And last year, I will just tell you this. Last year, that team was insanely detailed, insanely fundamentally sound, and they had J.J. McCarthy to bail them out on 3rd down when needed. And they had Roman Wilson and some wide receivers that could actually go get it, which is another big 3rd down thing. This team doesn't have that. So they better be buttoned up, and they weren't, and they got beat. And Washington's a good team. Husky Stadium is a tough place to play. Haven't lost in that building since 2021. That's prior to Kalen DeBoer. And you get beat. And now you got 2 losses. A team that did not struggle was Ohio State. Ohio State pulls away in the second half. They beat Iowa 35-7. Now, a lot of people I heard saying well, it was only 7-0 at half. Okay, that's true. And a couple of turnovers were sloppy. They failed on a 4th down, and that's what kept it at 7-0. The difference is that Ohio State owned the line of scrimmage against Iowa. Owned the line of scrimmage. They ran it for over 5 yards per carry, which doesn't generally happen against Iowa. Just doesn't. In fact, when you look at the amount of times that actually happens against Iowa, it happened one time last year, and maybe like one time the year before. Like, teams don't just win the line of scrimmage. They have those levels of defense. They're incredibly tough up front. And Ohio State just kind of handled them. 5 yards per carry. Defensively, they had 4 sacks. Defensively, they had 9 tackles for loss. And Iowa didn't have any of that. They had 1 sack, 2 tackles for loss. So the line of scrimmage was just a massive win for Ohio State. And I start with that because that's one of the questions that we all have is like, what is their offensive line going to do? Well, one of the only offensive lines that can really win it against an Iowa team in the last couple of years. And then you get all the weapons on the outside. I think that's a given. Even without Carnell Tate playing, which is precautionary and he'll be back against Oregon, you've got the best skill position players in the country. Jeremiah Smith, again, with another Moss get off me touchdown. Just insane, dude. Like, this guy is ridiculous. Watching Ryan Williams and Jeremiah Smith, I continue to say, like, what high school kid was defending them last year? And then you realize, like, oh, that's right. Nobody was. Because nobody in college is defending these guys. They're insane. And Ibuka goes off, by the way. Oh, remember him? The one that we all forget about? Oh, that's right. He's still a top wide receiver in college football, top 5 wide receiver in college football. He goes for 3 tutties in the third quarter. It's like, oh, hey, let's welcome Ibuka. I think Emeka is a great, great person. I really enjoy talking with Emeka Ibuka. He has a great perspective. He wants to do something special with this group at Ohio State. He reminds me, although a different position and a different style of leader, he reminds me a lot of Blake Corum. You know, it was like neither of them were quarterbacks, but they're offensive skill position players, but kind of the heartbeat of the team is within these guys. He reminds me of Blake Corum in that respect a little bit. I know he's not going to be wanting to be compared to a Michigan Wolverine, but that's kind of what it reminds me of. The question for me still with Ohio State is going to be Will Howard. I think Will doesn't have to be great. I think that he can be a game manager and go win a national championship with this group, to be fair. And we're going to find out the answer about how well he can play over their next 3 games. Their next 3 games are insane, by the way. If you've been waiting to see what Ohio State will do against better competition, one, look at Iowa, because Iowa is no slouch, and they beat them 35-7 handily in that one and owned the line of scrimmage. And then now they're going to go to Oregon, number 3 in the country. They're going to be home against Nebraska, who's right now 27th in the country, just a couple of spots out of the top 25. And then they've got to go to Happy Valley and face Penn State, who's ranked number 4 in the country. So they've got to visit 2 top 5 teams before the election. Hello. That's going to be tough. Those 3 teams have a combined 15-1 record. And so all the questions that we have, whether it's offensive line related or Will Howard related, those are going to be answered over the next month. USC loses in Minneapolis. My goodness. It's like you just can't even take a break. It's just like fast and furious in this show. This was the classic trap game. Classic trap game. Minnesota is getting better and better and better, and they're finding their identity along the way of the season, okay? They lose a game that they shouldn't have to North Carolina early. They lose to Michigan in a game in which they find themselves in the second half, and in particular in that fourth quarter. Brosmer, their quarterback, is starting to emerge as this like leader for them. He comes in as more of a passer, and yet they lean back into what has made PJ Fleck successful at Minnesota. They went back to their blueprint, and I think this is where they need to live, all right? Play solid defense, physical on the defensive side, do what you can on that side, and then lean into the run game. That's their blueprint, right? They need to lean in, and Darius Taylor, their back, who I like, I think he's a really good player, 25 carries for 144. Minnesota ran it 40 times for 193 yards, 3 touchdowns on the ground against USC. It's like, that's the blueprint for Minnesota. So this is where it's a trap game. It's like, there's this team that's tough. They're at home. They're an underdog. They're getting better. They're straining. They're failing. They're growing. They're doing all the things that I was talking about early, okay? For a coach that's been really successful there, and he's a regimented guy, and he holds his own standard, and he's going to hold them accountable. And USC rolls in there, and they feel really good about themselves because they played sloppily and still kind of handled a Wisconsin team the previous week. Had turned it over 3 times, still beat them pretty easily. we're really good. And next week we've got Penn State, and that's the big one. And we'll just kind of clean up with these Minnesota Golden Gophers. And then they didn't. And USC did not play well. And guess what? Their weakest spots are exactly where Minnesota exploited their offensive line and defensive line. So turnovers have been an issue. The offensive line and defensive line have been an issue. And so now they've been in games in which they can't protect Miller Moss against Michigan and they lose the game. They've been in games now where they can't defend the run and lose, like Minnesota. So now all of a sudden both sides have shown a deficit, and you've got Penn State coming to town. And guess what Penn State is going to do? They're going to run the football and they're going to rush the quarterback, and probably as good or better than any of the teams that they've faced. I don't know if they rush quite as well as Michigan does, but it'll be close with Abdul Carter. So USC is in a bit of trouble right now. They've got to clean up the turnovers, another 3 against Minnesota. That's 8 over the last 3 games, and you're not going to win if you turn the football over. This game against Penn State is a matchup that I don't love for them. Penn State is going to run the ball, and they're going to do it with reckless abandon. Andy Kotelnicki will be creative. He'll get extra linemen on the field. They've got 2 of the best backs in the country, and they will lean on the run game. And meanwhile, nobody in college football over the last 3 years has sacked the quarterback more than the Penn State Nittany Lions. That's a pass rush that you do not want to deal with. They get off very quickly. They're athletic, and they get after it. Abdul Carter, denied Dennis Sutton. These guys are good players. I do not like this matchup for USC, in particular with the way that they have been playing.
Thank you for watching the Joel Klatt Show YouTube channel. And if you liked this clip, make sure to like it and subscribe to the channel, and you can stay up to date on all of my college football coverage.